Nick Whalen here from RotoWire. In this video, we're going to talk about some players to think about stashing in your fantasy basketball leagues. I know we're still a decent amount away from the trade deadline, not until February 6th, but want to run through a handful of players that I'll be looking to stash, especially in some of my deeper leagues. And these are mostly players who could benefit from current teammates being traded, but some could be traded themselves. Some could benefit from some injury developments. But we'll get right to the list here, and we'll start with a player that I think I've talked more about on our YouTube channel than any other player this season, Bub Carrington of the Washington Wizards. We are back on Bub Carrington watch. He's been back in the starting five for the Wizards over the last week or so, but that is only because Malcolm Brogdon is hurt right now. Wizards actually have a bunch of guys missing time, including Kyle Kuzma and Alex Sarr. But more importantly, there are reports this week that Washington is looking to sell off some pieces. Shocking information, given where the Wizards stand right now. I think Malcolm Brogdon is the obvious one. He might be the most obvious trade candidate in the entire NBA right now. Jonas Valanciunas has been mentioned as a player who could be moved. Kyle Kuzma could be moved. I don't know who's taking Kuzma at this point. That might be a tough one to work out, but it's possible. Valanciunas, on a relatively cheap deal, I think he should be pretty movable. But if Brogdon in particular is dealt, which again, to me is basically a lock, then Bub Carrington likely slides right back into the starting lineup going forward. When playing at least 25 minutes this season, Carrington has given you 10.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 1.1 steals, and 1.6 So we're not talking about top 75 value here, but somebody who should continue to get better as the season goes along and should be a little bit more consistent minutes-wise if and when Malcolm Brogdon is traded. Couple footnotes for the Washington Wizards. I'd keep an eye on Justin Champagnie. Really only in deeper leagues right now. He's seen a big jump in minutes over the last few games. Wasn't even in the rotation until about a week ago, but he's somebody to monitor in deeper leagues as a potential stash. And then Kaishan George as well. He's been in the rotation all year, had started to lose some minutes recently, but now he's missed a couple of games due to injury. He would certainly benefit from all the potential trades that we just mentioned. Keep in mind, though, if the Wizards do clean house with some of these veteran trades, they're going to be bringing back at least a couple young players as well. So it's not necessarily just a clear bump, but I feel the best about Bub Carrington of all those Wizards that we just talked about. Next on the list, Ayo Dosunmu of the Chicago Bulls. And like Washington, Chicago's another team with some pretty obvious trade candidates and a team that I think has been kind of stuck in the middle zone for too long and probably wants to put an end to that. Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic sit at the top of that list. It's easier said than done to trade veterans on big contracts with the new CBA, but no secret that both of those guys are very much available. If LaVine is dealt, I think Ayo Dosunmu becomes the obvious beneficiary in that backcourt. He's already started 9 games in a row. Bulls have been going with the smaller lineup while Pat Williams has been out. He's averaging 16, 6, and 3 with a steal and almost 2 threes per game in that span. He is already rostered in a lot of leagues, but he's available in over 60% of ESPN leagues right now. So if you're in a shallower format and he's out there, I would look to grab Ayo Dosunmu before it's too late. A couple other players to monitor in Chicago. Jalen Smith. I think if Nikola Vucevic is traded, he would be the obvious next man up. There's not a lot of big man depth right now in Chicago. And then the rookie Matas Buzelis out of the G League Ignite. He's shown some flashes of late, still not really playing consistent enough minutes or putting up a consistent enough numbers to really warrant fantasy consideration. To me, he's probably more of a points league guy, but he's someone I'd really like to see more of as the season goes along. And again, if they trade LaVine and or Vucevic, it might take both for Buzelis to really see enough run, but he'd be somebody that I would consider stashing, especially in deeper leagues. For the Portland Trailblazers, Donovan Clingan is the name who comes to mind. Now, he's been hurt for a few weeks, so his roster rate has plummeted accordingly. He's only 12% rostered right now in ESPN leagues. But the Blazers did say this week that Clingan has been cleared to return to on-court work. He's starting to ramp up, so should be back in the mix, you would think, in the next week or two. Clingan has already looked really good in fairly limited action so far. Almost 7 rebounds, over 2 blocks per game on the year in just 17 minutes. I mean, the blocks alone are gold in a category league. Right now, of course, DeAndre Ayton, Rob Williams are on this roster. I think it's likely that at least one of those guys could be gone by the deadline. Not sure there's going to be a ton of interest in DeAndre Ayton at his salary number, but I think there's going to be plenty of teams looking into Rob Williams. Either way, Clingan has already proven that he doesn't need 30 minutes a night to be productive. If he can just get to even 20, 24 minutes per night, he's going to be in great shape. In the 5 games this season that Clingan has played at least 20 minutes, he's given you 10.8 rebounds, 3.4 blocks, and 1 steal per game. All right, another name to monitor, going back to the Eastern Conference here. I know we're digging a little deep, but Noah Clowney of the Brooklyn Nets. I think Brooklyn, yet another team to monitor over the next 4 to 6 weeks. They've been more competitive than I thought they would be this season. They're currently in play-in territory in the East, but at the end of the day, this is pretty clearly a franchise that is focused on the future. So I don't necessarily see them being a buyer at the deadline. Ben Simmons, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, all those could be trade targets. There's even been, some Cam Thomas rumors. I don't know if they'd make that deal, but I think Finney-Smith and Johnson are the two that will draw the most legitimate interest before the deadline. If either of those guys, or even both, are dealt, I think Noah Clowney would be poised to step into a considerable role for this Brooklyn team. He's been hurt lately, but when healthy, he's been a pretty consistent rotation guy, high volume three-point shooter. That would be the category to keep an eye on. In his 6th highest minutes games of the year so far, he's hit 2.8 threes per game. He's taken over 6 per game in that span. And, we're talking an average of less than 20 minutes in those 6 games. So he's a name, especially in deeper formats, that I would consider stashing once we get closer to the deadline. We'll finish out with a little rapid fire. 3 more names to monitor as potential stashes. Number 1, Jordan Hawkins of the New Orleans Pelicans. He's been out with a back injury for almost 2 weeks. He also missed a couple weeks in November. So we'll see when he's back. No firm timetable right now. But the Pelicans in general just continue to be rocked by injuries. This is as bad as I've seen. I thought Memphis last year was bad. The Pelicans might have it worse. Brandon Ingram is, of course, the latest player who's going to miss extended time. Zion still out indefinitely. Who knows when he's going to be back. Whenever Hawkins is healthy, I think he's going to see consistent minutes, even if it's in a bench role for this team. And in deeper leagues, I'd be looking to stash him in an IR spot right now if I need 3-pointers. I'll also mention Cam Whitmore of the Houston Rockets. And to be clear, he is not in the rotation right now for the Rockets. He's not even really in the NBA all that often. He's been spending a lot of time in the G League. But I'll tell you this, he would be playing for a lot of teams in the NBA right now. The Rockets just have so much depth, specifically at the wing position. But I include Whitmore here because Houston could be one of those teams that's looking to make a trade at the deadline. Obviously, they've been connected to the Jimmy Butler rumors, but this roster is ripe for a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-2 type of deal to consolidate some of that young talent. And I don't know if it happens in Houston, but I think Whitmore could be a piece who'd be sent out in a deal to acquire someone like Jimmy Butler. And if he were to land in the right situation, I mean, he could end up being a really, really valuable fantasy asset. Keep in mind, last year as a rookie, he posted a 27% usage rate. 27%. That is higher than Paul George, Anthony Davis, DeJounte Murray, Jordan Poole, DeMar DeRozan. Cam Whitmore loves shooting the basketball. He will shoot the basketball when he is on the floor. When he saw at least 20 minutes last season, so we're talking 24 games, he gave you 16 points, 5 rebounds, and over 2 made 3-pointers per game. We'll finish out with Brandon Pajemski. Warriors are another team reportedly looking for upgrades. They're on the list for Jimmy Butler. We'll see how serious that is. And Golden State has some difficult paths to acquiring a player like Butler. But nevertheless, I think Pajemski, he's been a bigger part of the rotation of late, still struggling to find his fit. Hasn't really been the same guy that he was last year. I think a lot of people, myself included, thought he could take a step forward, and he really hasn't. But moral of the story is I think he'd be a fairly attractive throw-in in a trade. He's not the piece that's going to get you someone like Jimmy Butler, but he might be the second piece that pushes the deal over the line. And like Cam Whitmore, I think he's somebody who could really thrive in the right environment. So Pajemski, Whitmore, Jordan Hawkins, 3 other names to keep an eye on if we're talking stashes in fantasy basketball.